really for 40 years or 45 years since the Iranian Revolution, Iran, as an Islamic republic, has been very hostile to Israel and supported the Palestinians and other groups who are anti-Israeli. And some people say, well, we've had 45 years of tensions between them. It's never really come to a war, so maybe this crisis will pass. But I think this crisis, starting with the Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy building in Damascus, Syria, actually has raised the temperature enormously, because the Israelis assassinated, in effect, 13 senior Iranian Revolutionary Guards commanders. These are the people who are the pillar of the regime in Iran, both enforcing the government at home, but also projecting its power abroad. And they organized the support for anti-Israeli groups like Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where the war has been raging now for 6 months, and also the Hezbollah group, a similar group in Lebanon, just over the northern border from Israel. So the Israelis, I think, feared that the Iranians were preparing a proxy attack, as it were, people who weren't strictly speaking Iranians, but supplied with weapons, supplied with intelligence by Iran, to attack them. And they took out these key Iranian planners. And it means that the Iranian regime feels that it can't be seen to take that on the chin and let it pass by. And so we now face the real risk that Iran will enter a war directly with Israel, not just helping third parties who don't like Israel, like Hamas and so on. I think, they've suspected, or perhaps even had firm intelligence, that the Iranians were planning to do something through Lebanon and Syria very nasty to them, and they thought they would preempt it. But also, maybe because of what happened on the 7th of October last year, when Hamas attacked southern Israel, killed well over 1,000 Israelis, took hundreds of hostages, Israeli society, not just Prime Minister Netanyahu, but Israeli society feels mortally threatened and wants, as it were, to eliminate these mortal threats to it in a way that perhaps in previous years they sort of resisted terrorist attacks and so on, but they put up with them. And now there's this fear that maybe a mortal danger threatens them, so Israel must get ready to strike back. And so you have the Iranians feeling that they can't be seen to back down, they can't show weakness, because apart from anything else, that might encourage critics of the regime in Iran to turn against it. But so the Iranians don't want to seem weak, but the Israelis also don't want to let the problems they have with Iran, with Iran's friends, fester anymore. And so this is the recipe really for a head-on clash. The problem for Israel is that the Iranian missiles are much more dangerous to them than the things that Hamas or Hezbollah have fired into Israel over the recent years, because these are rather primitive ballistic missiles, and the Israeli Iron Dome defensive system is very sophisticated. Its computers can track the trajectory and shoot down these missiles. But the Iranians now have missiles that have maneuverable warheads. And so even if you can notice where the missile is launched from, you might not be so able to shoot it down because it's not following a nice, neat elliptical line. You know, the classic ballistic missiles follow a pattern. Once you know they're coming, you can try to shoot them down, and the Israelis have been successful. So Iran is trying to raise fears of what its capacity is. It's trying to build tension, because I suppose the Iranians hope that the Americans and Britons and Europe and so on will play on the Israelis to back down. But in a way, the Israelis are not actually doing anything more against Iran. It's the Iranians who really are trying to raise the stakes. And it's not clear to me that they will back down, though they have a number of possible ways of raising the stakes short of an all-out war. The Israeli Iron Dome system is very good at dealing with primitive, rather simple missiles of the sort that Hamas used to fire from Gaza into Israel, or the Hezbollah from Lebanon. And it's been remarkably successful. But since October the 7th, the Israelis have faced two problems. One is the actual penetration of fighters into their territory and then going on the rampage, as the Hamas fighters did, possibly people from the Lebanese border to the north might do. And then secondly, the kind of missiles that Iran has are much more sophisticated and much more powerful in terms of destructive power, explosive power, than anything that Hamas has been able to use. Yeah, I think if we remember 2 years ago, the Americans actually did have a very good idea Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Some people say, oh, no, the Russians won't be so stupid or whatever, but they were. Similarly now, I think there are people a bit complacent saying that, you know, Iran has barked a lot about Israel over many years, but it's never bitten. Well, maybe now the Americans should be taken seriously when they say, the French, to something nasty is on the horizon. And one of the things the Iranians want to do by, if you like, frightening off outsiders from Israel, of course, is to damage the Israeli economy. We've already seen, over Easter, that huge numbers of Western tourists, Christian pilgrims who go to Jerusalem or Bethlehem, haven't come really since October last year. And so the tourist element of the Israeli economy is under pressure. Huge numbers of young men, young women in Israel are in uniform. They're not doing their normal jobs. So the Iranians are waging a kind of economic war already against Israel. And there's obviously the threat of physical violence, of missiles flying into the country from outside, is going to discourage not only tourism, but business of all kinds. And as we can see, also diplomats will lie low. I think it's impossible to foresee America abandoning Israel for all sorts of reasons, emotional links, but also strategic links. On the other hand, the United States is not as powerful in the Middle East as it used to be. And so it's hoping to get, for instance, China to mediate. And China is in a bit of an ambivalent position. China, on the one hand, buys a lot of oil and gas from Iran. It's quite friendly to Iran as a troublemaker towards its rivals in the West. But on the other hand, a real war would disrupt all that trade between Iran and China. So there's an interest for China to play a role. But of course, the downside of that from the point of view of the United States would be, once China is the mediator, what will happen in the future? Will it not begin increasingly to play a bigger role in the whole region with other states like Saudi Arabia and UAE and so on? And the other problem is the United States already is stretched. It has been supplying a lot of military aid to Ukraine. It's worried about China might attack the Philippines or Taiwan, so it has to have a lot of resources in the Pacific. And it's been supplying a lot of anti-aircraft and other equipment to Israel. So although the United States is the strongest power in the world, it's not as strong, not as dominant a superpower as it was a few years back. And so all of this comes with a very uncertain time for everybody. And this is very risky, because in the good old days when you just had the United States as the only superpower, it could sort of slap people down, so don't misbehave. But now it might find that Israel, for instance, says, we want to do something that you don't want us to do, but we feel it's desperately important for us, so we'll do it. Equally, Iran and other states may do things that in the past they would have been cautious about challenging the United States. You see, already Russia's exports of oil and gas are making much more money. Okay, we in Europe don't buy it anymore, but other people do. And all these tensions in Ukraine, in the Middle East, pushing up the price of oil and natural gas and other resources. And who produces these? Russia. It has all sorts of things wrong with Russia, obviously, but it is a storehouse of raw materials. And so Putin's war is now actually making a profit for him. And it's beginning to cause economic problems in the wider world. I'm not suggesting this is the main consideration for President Biden, but he's running for re-election. If oil prices shoot through the roof because of a Middle Eastern war that cuts off oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, then of course his voters at home might say, well, I'm paying much more for energy, much more for gas. Why am I going to vote for him? So we could see quite a significant economic consequence, economic depression even in the wider world, if we have more than a few pinpricks between Israel and Iran. And I fear the likely problem is that neither Israel nor Iran will want to be seen as the country that backs off first. So instead you get a kind of escalation ladder. If the Iranians do something to attack the Israelis will have to respond. The Iranians won't be able to back off. And so you could find yourself going down a path towards an ever bigger conflagration, which, I'm not going to ignore the human cost, but leaving aside the human cost for a moment, will have big economic consequences for the rest of us too. And I think we're likely to see a ladder of escalation. And whether then maybe the Americans and the Chinese together move in to pressure both sides to back off, that might be the best solution, but it's not easy to see how that could work.